There are many interesting characters from the A Song of Ice and Fire novels that didn't make it into the later seasons of the television show, and one of the most mysterious of them is Marwyn the Mage. He's an Archmaester at the Citadel who met with Sam Tarly when he arrived in the books. He's also been to Ashai and apparently taught Miri Mazdur. Shortly after Sam's arrival, Marwyn the Mage hops on a boat and sails off east to meet Daenerys. There was obviously no equivalent character in the television show, and this has left many people completely up in the air on what Marwyn could possibly be doing or what his role in the story may be. Now, today I want to talk a little bit about something that was brought up in the comments on one of my videos about 9 months ago when we were talking about Marwyn. This is one of those ideas that I had never really seen proposed before, but as soon as I started to think about it, it just made a ton of sense, and I feel like all of the evidence is pretty straightforward. So today I'm going to be making the case that Marwyn is chewing on weirwood leaves, and that this is something we should talk about in the fandom, at least on some level or another, making it a part of the discussion when we talk about Marwyn's character. Because the idea of eating weirwood leaves is actually pretty interesting and may have some magical implications if it is indeed what Marwyn is doing. First off, that piece of evidence that to me just feels very straightforward. Outside of the building where Marwyn stays at the Citadel, there is a giant weirwood tree in the courtyard, and a bunch of its branches are described as dead, but elsewhere there were still some red rustling leaves. So to me, what this pretty clearly implies is that the reason that some of the branches appear dead is because they don't have any leaves growing, whereas some of the tree does. This would line up pretty well to me if someone who was living near this weirwood happened to be picking leaves for some reason or another. Not necessarily like harvesting all of the leaves at once like they're a crop or anything, but just, plucking one or two a day for personal use. Assuming that it takes a while for the leaves to grow back, it would make a lot of sense that part of the tree would appear dead if someone were slowly picking away at them. Then you get inside, and one of Marwyn's noticeable characteristics is how his teeth are stained red from chewing sour leaf, and he at one point when he's talking to Sam has red juice running between his teeth. Of the very few things that we know about Marwyn, he definitely has an interest in magical power, and he's been traveling all around the world studying crazy lost arts, and he's even written a book called The Book of Lost Books. If anyone was going to be the one guy in the story who has the lost knowledge about chewing on weirwood leaves and that it can give you a little bit of magical power, would that really surprise anybody? Marwyn, who also uses a glass candle and who has been to Ashai and who taught Miri Mazdur, seems like he has an aptitude for gaining magical knowledge and magical power to some extent or another. So let's take a look at what Marwyn is potentially doing in comparison to what Bran does when he's up in the cave with Bloodraven. Remember, on his magical training journey, Bran is at one point in his last chapter in Dance, fed a giant bowl of weirwood paste which kicks off a trippy magical experience. To me, it definitely seems possible that Bran has just taken a heroic dose of weirwood sap while he was eating that paste, and Marwyn is doing the equivalent of microdosing. And given that the Citadel is basically the Westerosi version of a tech company, having Marwyn out there microdosing on magical leaves is something that I think would fit pretty well and be kinda funny. But on a very real level here, if there is any weirwood sap or weirwood juice, whatever you want to call it, in these leaves, it makes a lot of sense that he is basically microdosing on whatever Bran was doing when he was eating the weirwood paste. And let's remember what we know about weirwood sap. Mainly that it seems to be blood, like it could even just very directly be blood that is flowing through the trees. This lines up pretty well with what we've talked about in the past about how all magic seems to be some form or another of blood magic. Whether you're burning people alive for Rolor or sacrificing people to the Weirwoods, it seems like blood is the sort of conduit for magical power in this world. Now, we're told from the beginning that Weirwood sap looks like blood, but we aren't explicitly told that it directly is blood. But of course, as we read further on into the books, we find out that humans are sacrificed to the Weirwoods, and trails are hung up in the Weirwood branches, and then Asha Greyjoy gets a very close up and personal view of a Weirwood with bleeding sap coming out, and she says, no, that is frozen blood. When she gets up close to it, all of the stories about how it looks like blood are things that she's heard before, and she says, nope, I can tell what I'm looking at. It's not that it looks like blood, that is frozen blood. At least that's what Asha Greyjoy seems to think. Now, I've talked in the past about how this would make a lot of sense if there is indeed blood flowing through the Weirwood trees, that then being hooked up to them in the way that the Green Seers are would be a way to sort of extend your life, because you can be fed energy from the blood that has been sacrificed into the trees. So, overall, I think that the idea of there being magically sacrificial human blood flowing through these Weirwoods at all times is something that makes a lot of sense, and therefore I don't think it's that big of a leap in logic to think that Marwyn could be tapping into some of that magical power if he's choosing to chew on and consume weirwood leaves every day. Now, I'm obviously not a tree scientist, but I feel like it is pretty straightforward to think that the leaves are formed from the nutrients that exist within the tree, and if the nutrients within a weirwood are essentially human blood and sacrificial magic, well, then that just makes it all a pretty straightforward connection. So, with all of this pretty straightforward evidence lining up, what I think is at least worth doing is when we talk about Marwyn as a fandom, we should have at least one of the things on his list of characteristics potentially choose on weirwood leaves. I will let your brains run wild with the potential implications of this. Is it something that could give him some sort of foresight or potential magical knowledge in the way that sort of weirwood visions seem to be able to do? Who really knows? Let me know if you have any good theories for that down in the comments. And this is one of those ideas that when it was first brought up in the comments, I was instantly like, oh, hey, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the more I've thought about it and the more that I've sat with it, the more sense it seems to make. To me, it just makes complete sense that Marwyn would be chewing on some sort of mixture of sour leaf and weirwood leaves. Probably a mixture to hide whatever he's doing from the Archmaesters, as he says you don't want to talk about magic or trying to gain magical power at the Citadel unless you fancy poison in your porridge. I also do want to say that I think sour leaf is probably a real thing. It's not like everyone's out there chewing on weirwood leaves and saying it's sour leaf. I think it's just a convenient excuse for Marwyn to be chewing on some red leaves. We have other examples of characters who chew on sour leaf at various points in the story, and I don't think that everyone is chewing on weirwood leaves. I think that Marwyn is more of an exception to the rule here, and as I said, sort of just using a regular habit in Westeros for a bit of cover for what he's actually doing. So to me, all of this just lines up and falls down nicely together like dominoes. It just seems like this is a thing that George wants us to think about, which is why it's interesting to me that I hadn't really heard this discussed much in the fandom, at least not until it was brought up in the comments of one of my videos. I'm sure it has been out there, but it seems like it's just such a straightforward theory, it feels like something that we should talk about every time we bring up Marwyn. As far as theories about these books go, it doesn't really require any big leaps in logic, and as I said, all of the evidence just kind of falls together nicely like a set of dominoes. We have a guy in Marwyn who is very interested in magical power, has a bunch of magical knowledge that others don't have, and he's out there chewing on red leaves all the time. Then we also have the fact that weirwood sap or weirwood paste on some level or another seems to grant magical powers, so it would make some sense that the red leaves he's chewing on could be weirwood leaves. And then what do you know, right outside of his building, there is a big weirwood that is missing about half of its leaves. It really doesn't get much easier to spell out in a Song of Ice and Fire theory than that. So I don't think there's too much tinfoil involved in believing this one, but maybe we can build some fun tinfoil on top of it. If anything interesting comes to mind when you think about Marwyn chewing on weirwood leaves, or if you have any interesting implications of this that you can come up with, or even if you have anything that could potentially debunk this theory, leave it down there in the comments. I have a few interesting comments that will probably turn into videos already at some point on my to-do list, but maybe you can add some others. I also have a couple longer projects on my to-do list, and hopefully some of them will be coming out soon, and House of the Dragon obviously coming up with Season 2 pretty soon, so I'm hoping that I can go back to multiple videos a week once that starts to kick off. Be sure to check out some of my other videos if you're new here, or share this one with someone else who might find it interesting. Like and subscribe and all that stuff, it really helps out the channel. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll be back with something else very soon.